Okay, begin our second part of our program tonight. And instead of doing the introductions to our second speaker, I'm going to introduce his son and let his son introduce him. This is Kurt Grieb, one of our young members. You may know Kirk as, well, he does all kinds of things around here, but mostly he's in the band. That's how I know him, he's in the band. But here's Kurt Grieb.
I wasn't expecting to say anything, but here it goes. Just wanted to introduce my dad. He's a very quiet guy, so you guys may have seen him around peeling potatoes or singing in the choir. But I got to do a report on him in college. It was an honors report. And the things that this man went through in his early life, you know, where he went through, he started off in the Ukraine, as you see, and his path all around Europe during the World War. And how he ended up here is just simply amazing. So I hope he's able to convey that. I've tried to put some slides together to help everyone out a little bit. But yeah, without further ado, I introduce my dad, Erwin.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Erwin Grieb. I was born in October 1932 in Neue Sis, Bessarabia. Bessarabia is located to the west of the Ukraine. Our county seat, city of Ackerman, was about 2 hours drive away from Odessa. In the year 1814, the Russian Tsar Alexander I decided to bring settlers into Bessarabia. Bessarabia was devastated by the Turkish wars, and there were only a few nomads living in that area. We were promised 10 years free of taxation, no military service, freedom of religion, and all the rights the Russian people had. The government gave every family 270 rubles for 10 years. That's what starting out. In the year 1814, 300 families came from Prussia, from around Warsaw, Bromberg, and from East Prussia. In the 1816 and 17, 1,500 families came from Württemberg, Swabia. The first settlers just dug holes in the ground and covered them up on the top until they were able later on to build houses. The winter in Bessarabia was very harsh, and in the summertime it was very hot. Some summers there was little rainfall, then you had also a bad harvest. The ground was very good for farming, rich black soil like in the Ukraine, and we did not need fertilizer, and almost every farmer had a vineyard. The farmers grew wheat, rye, barley, potatoes, corn, and over the years, the Russian government took some of the things that they promised before they took them away, and they also started putting pressure on the settlers to use the Russian language. On the end, they threatened us to move all of us. That was before, this was during the First World War. They were threatening us to move us to Siberia. But then the Communist Revolution came, and they had other problems. That is when Romania came in and occupied that area. Not much did change except the language that was hard for the people. In the meantime, they had learned some Russian, and now they had to learn another language. The same thing like under the Russians, the Romanian started to put pressure on our people that we should speak Romanian only. When my father went to school, he had to learn Russian. When he was drafted into the military that was under Romania then, he had to learn Romanian. In the military, they did not get new uniforms when they were inducted, all old clothing and old shoes. One day the king came for a visit. They all became new uniforms and shoes. And soon as the king was gone, they had to turn all the new uniforms back in.
What else is new?
And wear their own stuff. Over the years, life for the settlers became better. And of the first things after their houses were built, they built a church and a school. In our town, everything was in one building, the school and the church. And next to the building was a bell tower with 3 bells, and a small one, medium, and a larger. And every bell had a special meaning. In most of the towns, all the cows were driven out in the morning to the open grasslands out of town. A herder was with them, and around 6 p.m. he brought them back into town. That was also quitting time for the farmers. That is when the small bell was rung. A friend of mine and I decided that we were going to ring the quitting bell. We went up in the bell tower and we were looking for the cows to come in. As soon as we could see them, we started ringing the bell. The only thing was we were not quite strong enough and it did not sound right. It was hitting only on one side. I told my friend, keep ringing. I'm going for some help. I looked down the tower and I could see my uncle passing by. I called him. He was a blacksmith and a very strong man. He came up and with one hand, he rang the bell. He was asking, he said, what are you kids doing up here? On our way home, the people were asking what was wrong with the bells tonight. Our town was not a Swabian town. Our dialect was more like it's spoken in northern Germany. We had only one Swabian man living in our town, and he was called the Schwaber Gustav. And there was no intermarriage between our people and other ethnic groups. If it happened, those people were not accepted anymore in our community, because the next town was a Russian town, and then we had some German towns. And in our town, all the people were Lutherans. We had one minister, but he was responsible for 3 or 4 towns. So we had a minister only every 3 to 4 weeks. The Sundays in between, a teacher performed the services. He was called a Küster. Expenses for church and school had to be paid by our community. The Romanian government did not invest anything. They only collected taxes. I guess they were not sure if they could keep that land. At that time, of the settlement, every family became the same amount of land. 60 desertine, about 66 hectare. The hectare is about 4 acres. Over the years, some farmers started selling some of their land. Even neighboring Russian farmers sold some land. That is why some farmers became richer than others. But over the years, land became very scarce and young people started leaving. Either they went deeper into Russia or they left for America. I remember one incident when 2 men came back for a visit from the United States. And they were going to impress our townspeople, and they spoke English to each other, which nobody understood. But then the one farmer said, they must know what they're saying, and they must understand each other, because one man said something, and they both got up and left at the same time. And over the years, the school system improved. We had schools for higher education. Talented young people were sent to Germany, to universities. They later came back as doctors, lawyers, teachers, and ministers. We also had tradespeople, carpenters, blacksmiths, tailors, shoemakers. Carpenters built furniture, they built the coffins, and they also built wagons. And they usually worked in cooperation with the blacksmith, building the wagons. My uncle was a blacksmith, and he said he could recognize if he heard a wagon coming, he could recognize if it was one of his. In later years, the community built a clubhouse. The young people now had a place to get together. They performed theater plays and also formed the chorus. The farmers never got the right price for their harvest. And some years they had to sell their harvest while it was still in the field. To stop that, they formed a cooperative that collected all the products they wanted to sell and sold everything to Germany and other countries. Then naturally they became a much better price. The people were happy with their lives and everything went well until June of 1940. That is when the Soviet army occupied Bessarabia. The first thing the communists did, they told us, nothing belongs to you, everything belongs to the state. You're going to plant what we tell you, and you're going to plant where we tell you. That was not the life our people wanted to live. The German government probably heard of our situation and sent a commission in to check the situation. They came back with a suggestion to take all the young people between 18 and 22 into the German army. The older people said, what do you think is going to happen to us under the communists if you take our young people into the German army? The German government then negotiated with the Soviet government. They came to an agreement that all the German people, after proving that they originally came from Germany, they could leave. Everything had to be left behind, except clothing and bedding. They had two commissions, one German and one Russian. You had to appear before the commission, the Germans if you wanted to leave, the Russian if you wanted to stay. The Russian had an easy day because no one wanted to stay. Under these circumstances, Yeah, but if you wanted to leave, you had to bring birth certificates from your grandparents, from your great-grandparents, all the way back to Germany to prove so you originally came from Germany. That was a long process because everything had to be looked up in church books. That's how they kept records, the books in the church. And yeah, and then on October 1st, 1940, we left our hometown with horse and wagon, and we drove down to the Danube by the city of Galatz. 934 people left Neuerzies, our hometown. Altogether, 93,329 people left Bessarabia in October 1940. It took us 5 days and nights on the Danube until we came to Zemlin, Yugoslavia. And in a big hall in Zemlin, a big meal was served to us. I met a man at the Donauschwaben here in Philadelphia, Adam Dickman. He was president. He told me, I still remember when you arrived in Zemlin. Our women did the cooking for you. He also said, you don't know how lucky you were to get out of that at that time, because what most Germans in Yugoslavia had to go through was much, much worse at the end of especially at the end of the war. From Zemlin we were transferred onto trains, and we went over Graz, Austria, to Prague, and then into the Sudetenland. We stayed there for about 10 months. When we left Bessarabia, we were told that we were going to be resettled in Alsace-Lorraine. But they resettled us instead in the Waterland in Poland, which is part of Poland. We had a good relationship with the Polish people. The children picked up the Polish language pretty fast. All the food was rationed at that time, and we were only allowed to kill 1 pig a year. Everything else had to be delivered to the government. We shared everything with the Polish people. We worked, the people who worked for my father. Everything went well until January 19th, 1945. That's when we were notified to pack up and leave because the Russian army was advancing. My father was drafted into the home defense, but the Polish people helped us to pack up and to get the wagon ready for leaving. We had a lot of snow that winter. Just before we left, my father came back. That was a big help. The Polish people told us, if you would have not been as good to us, we would have not helped you. Once on a road, German soldiers were directing traffic. They told us, if you don't make it across the Oder River in the morning, the bridges are going to be blown up because the Russians are close. We just barely made it, and when we were driving through Breslau in the morning, the first grenades were falling into the city. The 8th German Army under General Field Marshal Schörner, a Bavarian, was able to stop the Russians for 8 weeks. That gave a lot of people a chance to move deeper into Germany, and also the people of Silesia to get out. In the end, we wound up in the Sudetenland again. Driving through the mountains in Silesia, the Riesengebirge, in the winter time was very hard. We did not have any brakes on our wagon, and the shoes of the horses were not made for the icy roads. On the way way to stop the wagons, we put sticks between the wheels so they couldn't turn. And this way helped the horses to hold the wagon. At the end, we wound up in the Sudetenland. My father was drafted in the army again. We stayed in the Sudetenland until shortly before the Russians arrived. People were talking and saying, if you make it to the Elbe River near Leitmeritz, on the other side, the Americans going to be there. We still had our horses. My mother loaded up all our belongings, and as kids underage, and left, was trying to make it across the Elbe River. And we made it up to 8 kilometers before Leitmeritz, when everybody stopped turning around. There was a lot of military on the road too, not just civilians. And everybody turned around because they said the Russian army occupied the bridges near Leitmeritz. And we had to turn around, and the roads were very narrow. And while my mother was turning around, the shaft, you know, between the horses in German is Deichsel. I think they call it a Wangle, or Wangle. You know, that's where you steer the wagon. That's the horses where you can steer the wagon, but that broke. And so we couldn't drive anymore. And we stayed there, and the young German soldier, he seen that, and he came over, and I talked to my mother. He said, I'll fix it for you if you give me some civilian clothes, because he was in SS uniform. And he said, the Russians sure going to kill me if they catch me with that uniform on. So she took some clothing from my father, and he fixed it with a little axe. He chopped it down until it fitted again. And he stayed with us until we came back to where we left from. And then the Russians came. It was as bad as we were told it was going to be, especially for women. A good thing, my father was there. By him all, because of him being able to speak Russian, he could help us and protect us and some other people too. He could also get some food for us. My father befriended himself with a Russian sergeant. That sergeant told us, don't stay in the Sudetenland. As long as we are here, things are okay. But when the Czechs are coming, they are waiting. When they come in, it's really going to be bad. And that's the way it was. Many thousands of Sudeten Germans were killed and murdered, and the rest were driven out. We left before that. We crossed the Neisse River, and for a while we were living in southern part of Saxonia. From there we moved to central Saxonia near Weissenfels in Naumburg. A small town, Preitsch, that's where we stayed until 1946. And that's where my youngest brother Gerhard was born. The situation was not that good. The Russians stole everything. The railroad stations were filled with boxes and boxes of machinery to be shipped to Russia. They also started taking people to take them along to set everything back up again. We were afraid they might take my father too. That's when we started planning to leave. We started inquiring by the Communist Party. They told us, if you pay a certain amount of money, then you can leave, and we did. In May 1946, we crossed the border near Friedland, it's near Göttingen, in Lower Saxonia. That was a British zone. First we were pumped full with powder, you know, for lice. They pumped you full, and we looked like we came out of a flour mill. After a couple of days, we were sent to Nordheim, that's a county seat, and from there we were dispersed into different towns and different places. But we came to a small town called Fürstenhagen, and they asked us first, you wanted to go to a city or you want to go in the countryside. And at that time, food was very scarce, so we thought in the countryside it's going to be better to survive. And but that was the wrong thing to do, because later on when things got better, there was no work in the countryside. In the city you could get work. In Germany you went to school up to 14 years. Then you decided if you are going for higher education or you picked up a trade. I started as a helper in a big aluminum factory in the punch press department. I had to bring the tools to be sharpened into the machine shop. Then I could see the difference. Everything was a lot more quiet and cleaner than it was in the other parts of the factory. I went to the top boss and asked him if it was possible to get an apprenticeship as a tool maker, and he said yes. And before April 1st, I had to take a test. April, that is when the new apprentices start. I began the apprenticeship. After 3.5 years, I became my diploma as a tool and die maker. That was a good trade, and I could make a good living all my working life. In the early 1950s, President Eisenhower came out with a program to take in some refugees from Germany to help the bad situation there. But first they had to find sponsors for those people. In the meantime, I had left home and I was living in Düsseldorf. I had a good job and I was happy with my life. Early 1955, I was notified that they found a sponsor for me to come to the United States. After talking to my parents, I told the people from the American consulate that I would not leave without my brothers and my parents. Either all go or nobody goes. After a couple of months, we were notified that a sponsor for my brothers and my family was found. The sponsor was a Tolstoy Foundation. It was a big farm owned by a lady, a relative of the Russian writer Leo Tolstoy. She was sponsoring people who came from Russia. In my father's birth certificate, it says born in Russia. That is why they sponsored our family. My sponsor was Mr. Ludwig Hanold from Blaubeuern near Ulm. He had a factory in Volkrow, PA. He left Germany on February 29, 1956. We left from Bremerhaven on a Navy ship, the General Lamford. Yeah, that's the General Lamford in Baden. And that was our last meal in the evening in Bremerhaven. And the Atlantic crossing took us 13 days. We had terrible storms. People had to tie themselves up in the beds not to fall out. And in the beginning, there was a lot of people trying to get into the mess hall to get something to eat. But after a couple of days, you just could walk in. There's nobody wanted to go to eat anymore. My sponsor, Mr. Arnold, and his wife picked me up. At that time, he also met my family in New York. My family left for Valley Cottage in upstate New York, near West Point. I was living in Mr. Arnold's house. One night, he called me in his room and he asked me, "What do you hear from your family?" I told him, for my parents, it's okay, but because they were born on the farm. But my brother Richard, he is also an electrician by trade. There is no work for him, and he was going to learn English, but there everybody spoke Russian. Mr. Arnold called up the farm and asked if my parents were obligated to stay on the farm for a certain time. They told him they keep the people only until they can get along by themselves. He sent up a truck and a couple of people with cars. They moved my family to Norwood, PA, and my father also got work, and Richard got work in the factory. We did not need English because about 30% of the people were German or spoke German. So all you spoke all day long was German. My younger brothers still had to go to school. They picked up English fast. All of them got their high school diploma. After 10 months, I was drafted in the US Army. After 16 weeks of basic and advanced training, and I was sent back to Munich, Germany. Later on, I met my wife and we married and came back to the States. Eventually, all my brothers were drafted in the service. 3 of them served in Vietnam. Richard served in the Navy. So that's all of my speech.
Jakob, would you come back up to the stage? Thank you. That was fantastic. Why don't you come over here? I'm going to give you a little opportunity to ask these gentlemen some questions, but I want them to both be comfortable while they're doing that. Okay. Okay, we'll turn it back on after the question and answer session, and people can see those two. I'm just going to... if you would direct your questions to either Erwin or Jakob, and then they'll know who to pass the mic to.
Lloyd, could you make sure the questions are restated so we hear it on the video?
Okay. Anybody have questions?
Joachim, what year was that when you came over here on the Rotary Scholarship?
It was 53.
Tell them when you left Dresden and when you finally were able to go back to Dresden.
Well, my daughter reminds me what I should have said.
I was rushing him.
Left Dresden in 52 and, spent time in Bonn and Western Europe and US. And the first time I was able to get back was after the change in 90.
Oh, wow.
So all that time, I was not welcome in the Soviet zone of Germany.
Who paid for your education?
Who paid for the education? Now in Germany you don't pay, the taxpayer pays. You see, I had to work and had to make exams to deserve taxpayer support. But as I indicated, I got about $20 a month for working in the dean's office while I was doing my undergraduate work. the rest of the education, that is the master's and PhD, I had assistantships and they paid me, which means the US taxpayer, but I had to deliver goods for it. And as I indicated on my first visit, well, for my master's degree, I got a Fulbright grant which paid for the transportation from Europe to the US and back.
Andy, you had a question?
I had a question. Joachim, I know you as a hiker and as a fire buff. Where did you learn how to hike? Is that part of the Hitler Youth or?
No, family. We spent our vacations once on the Baltic, and my father got a terrible sunburn, and from then on we only went to the Alps for vacations, and that's a tradition of the family to spend time hiking, climbing, and I did a fair amount in this country, Mount Whitney, Long's Peak, and some of those, I look now stupidly. I went through the lowest point, Death Valley, one day with the family in our car, and went to Whitney Portal, which is the start for the climb to Mount Whitney, which was about 8,000 feet. And went to 14.5 the next day because I wanted to be at the lowest point one day and the highest point of the continental, that's not Alaska, US. So, when you're young, you do stupid things.
Erwin, you talked about your family leaving their village in Belisaraba and going to the Sudetenland eventually, but how did they go? Did they walk?
Well, we drove by horse and wagon to the Danube. And from there,
Mike.
and we drove by horse and wagon to the Danube. It was a small city, Galatz, and that's where we had to turn into horses and wagons. The Russians took that over, and we went to the ships. And 5 days and 5 nights on the Danube. We came down to Yugoslavia from there, and then we were transferred to trains.
Okay, so it's a combination.
Yes.
Erwin, when your family left Germany, were you Staatenlos or you still have German citizenship?
No, I still have my German passport.
Okay.
But it's not good anymore, no.
At that time when your family came to America.
Yeah, I had the German passport.
Okay.
When you went back to Neuertes, what was your impression of the place? You got to go back in 1994, right?
Yeah, we went in 95 and 94. We went back to Bessarabia. I wanted to see a lot of friends. With us cousins, we wanted to see what our hometown looked today, and it's not what it used to be. I mean, it's terrible what you see, dirty, filthy, and not the town what we left at that time. But I heard that for 5 years, nobody was living before the communists started resettling it. But the nearby Russian towns, they took all the animals and everything. When we left, they took all that away. But for 5 years, the whole town was sitting empty. But I mean, it's very little to recognize from when we left. I mean, I was 7 years old, At that time, I became 8 when we went on the ship. But today, I recognized only the church. It still looks the same, but it doesn't have the reed roof what we had. We had the reed that was a 1.5 foot about thick. It kept the houses very warm, and they had a metal roof on it today. But otherwise, the building still looks the same. But it's very little to recognize our old hometown. And the people today, there's 13 different nationalities living in here. And they don't even remember that they were Germans living at one time. Now, you know, people from Bessarabia, you know, they established that they rebuilt one farm exactly the way the farms were. It's like a museum today, and through education they find out who was living there before them.
Where did you say you learned your tool and die trade, and where did you work here in the United States?
That was in Göttingen. In the morning, that was, we were living in that small town, Fürstenhagen, and I had to walk 7 kilometers to the railroad station, take a
What country?
Germany, and take a 3/4 country train ride to Göttingen, and then walk for another 3/4 hours till I was in the factory. So I left 5 o'clock in the morning to start at 8 o'clock. And I got home, it was late in the evening when I got home. But I did that for 5 years. After I finished my apprenticeship, I stayed for another year with the company, then I left for Düsseldorf. But the way the trade was taught was terrific. I mean, I don't know if they still do it like that. I mean, you could succeed any place you went, because you went through the whole factory. You went, first half year was just filing, you know, with the rice. It's a piece of steel and you had to file on it, to learn how to file. And then you went through the whole factory, different departments, lathe, milling machines. You went through designing, heat treating, maintenance. You went through the whole factory. The last half year you worked with a tool maker. You know, there was no way you could fail when you went somewhere else. So I never had any trouble. And that was applied all my life.
And you used your trade here in this country?
Yes, yes. That's why Mr. Arnold, you know, from Ulm, that's why he sponsored me to come over. He needed tool makers. And there were some other tool makers too, mostly Germans.
General Motors,
Too late now.
If I might just add to that, the education in any trade, be it toolmaker, be it in my case agriculture, be it food, be it doing garments, is very thorough, and you have to have 2 to 3 years of practical experience under a master who will teach you, as you were saying, and go through the whole rigmarole. And that is why it is very important to recognize that there were good handy workers, be it tool makers, be it plumbers, be it home builders or whatever, which we need here.
I know you probably have more questions, but what I'm going to say is let us thank these gentlemen very much for a wonderful evening, really interesting background, and then take time with them personally, look at their books, talk to them, and we're going to show a few more slides, I understand, while we're setting things up, but thank you. These are special stories. They really are, and I so appreciate both of you sharing them with us this evening. Erwin,
Need my dad to explain everything. This helps.
Now we have to do to explain. Not take it for granted that it's the same. I couldn't explain. The code of arms. Yeah, the code of arms.
Erwin?
It's farming. The horses, yeah, they use the horses to do
Another UD.
Erwin, hold it up. I can't hear you.
They had the horse in there because to be able to survive, the horses were very important. And that was, because our people were very religious people, that's why you have the cross in there. This was a blue sky because it was always a lot of sunshine. That was a sign of the grain, from the harvest. That was the meaning of the emblem.
What was the left corner? The left corner, is that a well?
This one?
Links, yes.
Oh, that's a fountain. There's a bucket in the bottom, and you pull it down, and fill it up with water, and then you bring it up. There's a weight here on the back that helps you, that you can lift it up. That is the layout of our towns, the way it was. It just shows the names who was living where, but it doesn't really show the farms. They were a lot bigger. There was the barns, the stables, and the house where the people was living. And we had, there was a small creek running through, and we had 3 bridges. The upper end, in the middle, and the lower end, the bridge to cross over from one side to the other. And because there was no woodland, no trees or anything for wood for heating or something, so they used the common manure, first flattened it out, let it dry, and then they cut it into pieces for the winter time to heat the houses and to cook everything with it. From the corn, what do you call them?
Corn.
Husk. Yeah. They're also used for heating.
Oh, yeah.
That was my parents when they got married. It's my mother, my father, my grandfather, his wife, and that's my other grandfather, grandmother. That was a minister. And also at the same time, my father's half-sister, she got married the same, it was a double wedding. And the wedding lasted for 3 days. Before the wedding, the young men, they fixed up the horses with different ribbons so they looked nice. And they drove through the town and collected tables and chairs because at one farmer didn't have enough. So they put up the tables and the chairs. And then they celebrated, and usually wine was a thing to drink at a wedding. And that is about half the people from our town. And because we had 2 camps in this area, there was upper camp, and there was another one. There were about as many people as we see here.
Yeah, certainly.
Where's Little Richard?
That's Richard's next one.
On the left?
Yeah.
It was me and Richard.
Richard?
That was a camp in the Sudetenland where we stayed for 10 months. That was a wedding from France. That was in Lower Saxony where we stayed for 10 years.
Who got married?
That's my brothers. Yeah, there's one of my brothers, and that's myself and my cousin. That was the last night in Germany, in Bremerhaven. And that was a ship that General Langford we came over with.
That's it. That's it. That's it.